Well, this is my favorite topic. I've spent more of my life in translations and the Greek behind it than in probably anything else, so it's a fun topic for me to talk about. And I added in some more topics this morning, Mark, so we may not be quite as short as I have been in other sessions. Okay, all right, okay. There we are. So this is chapters 10 and 11 in the book on the issues of translation. I need to have just a disclaimer right up front, just to make sure it's clear. I am biased towards the ESV and the NIV. I was the New Testament chair of the ESV for 10 years. And I left that because there wasn't going to be an ongoing committee. And a couple of years later, I was talking to Robin and I said, my wife, and I just said, I really miss translation. And I don't know how else to get back into it. The next day, I got a letter from Doug Moo, who was here earlier, who's the chairman of the committee. And in the email, asked if I would be willing to come on the NIV committee as a friendly critic. He assumed I would try to make the NIV into the ESV, I think. So I've been on the NIV now for 11 years. And we'll stay on it till I can't translate anymore or I hit the mandatory age and have to step off. But anyway, that's my background. It puts me in a kind of unusual situation. I don't know of anyone else that has been a major member of two translation teams. So I'm kind of an odd duck in that one. I'm an odd duck in many ways, but I'm an odd duck in that way. And it makes for some fun discussion. So anyway, so that's enough of my disclaimer. I'm going to start just by talking a little bit about the translation process. And it's always helpful for me to know, is anyone in here bilingual? Okay, there are some. I have to ask that because when lots of things I talk about, the people that do truly know two different languages, they look at this, scratch their head and go, what's the point? Of course that's the way it is. And the problem is that most people are monolingual. And so the idea of going from one language to another is a very difficult concept for them to grasp. I remember when I was learning Hebrew, I was still at home. My big brother was there as well, Mike. And I showed him a sentence in Hebrew, and he goes, well, why don't they just say it like we say it? Mike's monolingual. He didn't understand the nature of languages. So for some of you, this will be a little bit of no-da, but that's why I needed to do this. Basically, translation is the two-step process. The first step is to figure out what the passage meant. And you're dealing with several things there. You're dealing with language. So the Old Testament is primarily Hebrew, some in Aramaic. The New Testament is all Greek. So you're dealing with a different language, and you're also dealing with a different culture. And the more I do this, the more I realize that we don't know that much about the ancient culture. And there is so much when you and I communicate that's between the lines that if you're a part of that culture, you pick it up. If you're not a part of that culture, it's a lot harder to pick it up. We were down in the ocean a couple of days ago, and my wife said, I wonder what they're fishing for. And in my nice, loving, kind attitude, I said, oh, I don't know, fish. Well, that's the right answer, right? They're fishing for fish. But in the context of sitting on the beach at Hilo, I know very well what she was asking, even though she didn't say it. She didn't say, I wonder what kind of fish they're looking for or fishing for. She said, I wonder what they're fishing for. But the real question she was asking is, what kind of fish are they fishing for? Because that's what I mean when a lot of communication goes on between the lines. And that space is, if you're a native speaker, is filled in with your understanding of the cultural context. If you're not native to that culture, you're going to lose a lot of those kinds of things. So in figuring out what a passage meant historically, you have to fight with languages, and you also have to fight with a culture. And I'm going to be showing you some illustrations of that. The second step of translation, then, is to say, well, what does it mean? What is it? Not in the sense of application, but in the sense of, okay, well, how do I say the same thing in my target language? Let's say I figured out in Greek or in Hebrew what the original author meant to convey. How do I say the same thing in the target language, in our case, in English. And one of the really big variables at this stage is style. We all have different ways of expressing truths. Mark Strauss is a really, really good gospel scholar. He's from San Diego, and he's fluent in Spanish, which it gives an interesting twist because most of his illustrations are in Spanish, but he's a native English speaker. But he's from San Diego, all right? So he actually could be from around here, and it'd be the same point I want to make. And he will be working on a translation. How do we do this? And he'll say, well, I say it this way. And I'll turn to him and go, Mark, none of us were raised on the beach in San Diego. None of us talk like that. Oh, that's how you say it. Well, yeah, on the beach in San Diego, that's how you say it. Or maybe on the beach in Hilo, but it's not how most people say it. This is one thing that makes translation really interesting. There's an illustration that Doug Moo uses about one of the older members in the committee. We're trying to translate the word heremos, which is desert or a wilderness area. And he objected to that translation because for him, being raised in Kentucky, a wilderness is a wooded place. Well, that's not what a wilderness means to me. It's in my mind, a wilderness is Wyoming. All right, lots of sagebrush, not a lot of other stuff. I mean, we all hear that word differently. My guess is, okay, when we came here, we landed in Kona and we drove over the mountain to get here. What do you call that area in the middle part of this island? A training area. Yeah, there was a lot of military stuff, wasn't there? Pardon? Saddle Road. But yeah, I mean, I would call that wilderness. All right? You might have a different word for it, but I'm saying our styles and how we hear words is significantly different. So that's the challenge in translating. You'd have to figure out what it meant, dealing with language issues. You know, like in, Isaiah? Only 1 out of 4 words in Isaiah occur anywhere else in the New Testament. The Old Testament. Almost all the words, I think that's the number, almost all the words are unique to Isaiah. Job is somewhat the same statistic. So how do you figure out what a word means? Well, you have to learn Akkadian and Ugaritic and all those other fun languages to try to figure out what it would mean in Hebrew. So different language, different culture, different sense of style. And one of the points that I want to make is that all translation involves interpretation. Every once in a while I come across someone who says, well, my Bible is not interpretive. It's very accurate. And I go, no, that's not at all. That's not at all what your Bible is. Every single verse in every single Bible involves a subjective layer of interpretation. It does, every single one. So all translations are interpretive. Some are more interpretive than others. Some err on the side of words, and we'll talk more about this, and you have to figure out what the words mean. Other translations err more on the side of meaning, and the translators want to help you know what it means, not so much what the words are. But every Bible out there is highly interpretive. Highly interpretive. Even the NASB is highly interpretive. And here's the other kind of introductory comment I wanted to make, is that translation is about conveying meaning. It's not about conveying form. There are people that, for example, will say, well, if the Greek has a participle, then in English it should be a participle. That's how you get an accurate translation. Well, that's not what translation is. Translation is not the conveying of one form to another form. If it has a participle, we use the participle. If it has a preposition, then we use the preposition. Translation is about conveying meaning. What did the original authors mean? And then how do I convey that same meaning? That is my bias. It actually is a slight switch I made. I actually wrote a little book for Zondervan called On What I've Learned Since Joining the CBT. CBT is the Committee on Bible Translation, which is the name for the 15 people that control the text of the NIV. And this was the big thing I learned coming out of the ESV. In the ESV, we are much more content just to try to get the words across and leave it up to you. The NIV is much more about conveying the meaning, and I've learned that really is what translation is. So those are my kind of biases up front, but it is what makes translation a very interesting process. Let me talk about two different things. I'm going to talk about vocabulary, and I'm going to talk about grammar. The way I like to say it is languages are not codes. When I first learned Greek in college, I kind of thought of languages as Morse code. And Greek would have a different set of dots and dashes. So Bill in Morse code is dot, did it, did it, did it, did it, did it. All right. I just assumed it would be dot, did, dot, or something. You know, it was like I thought I could transfer directly from English into Greek. And for those of you that know more than one language, you know how absurd that assumption was on my part. That's not the way languages function. There's not codes. There's not exact equivalences between languages. So for example, you know that Greek does not have the indefinite article? It doesn't have the word a. Technically, Greek doesn't even have a definite article. It has a word ha, H-O sound, ha, that is often translated as the. Sometimes it's not translated. Sometimes it has no meaning. It's a grammatical indicator. Sometimes it's a possessive pronoun. Sometimes it's a personal pronoun. There is no exact equivalent of either the indefinite or the definite article in Greek. That's just the nature of the language. If I had illustrations from Hebrew, it'd be even more radical than that. But I'm going to stick to the one language I kind of understand. Languages are not codes. There's not an exact equivalence in vocabulary in one language to another, which then obviously makes it difficult, doesn't it? Well, if the Greek says this word and we don't have an exact equivalent of that word, what word do we use? That's where style comes in. But the same thing can be said about vocabulary in terms of semantic range. That's a technical term for it. I like to think of a bundle of sticks. Every word is a bundle of sticks, and each stick in the bundle has a different meaning. Now, sometimes one stick will be larger than other sticks, right? In other words, one word might have a dominant meaning, but not always. But they always have secondary and tertiary meanings. There's a lot of sticks in the bundle. For example, what is the word run? R-U-N. What does the word run mean in English? Okay, you run down the street, run along the beach. I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Yeah, to move quickly. Operate a program, all right. Run a business into the ground. The clock runs fast. Oh, I'm sorry, you saying running for office? Oh, like paint would run. They're having their garage painted right now. I don't think there's any runs on it, but yeah. I mean, we can go on and on with this, but I mean, run is one of those words that simply has no large stick in its bundle. This illustration I like to use is key. This may have been the word I used in the book. What does the word key mean? Well, you can shoot from it. You can play on key. I've heard you. You can... my illustration is my favorite pie is key lime pie eaten in Key West, Florida. We got to go to Key West once, and every night we went to a different restaurant to get a different piece of key lime pie. I just fell in love with key lime pie. But the word key, it doesn't have a big stick in the bundle. Okay, that whole range of meanings of the word key, that's what we mean by a semantic range. And not only do we not have exact equivalences of words, we don't have words that have the same range of meaning. They don't have the same semantic range. For example, this is one of them that the older NIV got a lot of flack for, because the word sarx, people would say the word sarx means flesh, and you should translate sarx as flesh. Well, no, it doesn't. It can mean this stuff. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That's sarx. But sarx also means sinful human condition. It has actually a very wide range of meaning. I think the ESV translated sarx something like 20 different ways. It's in the book, I think. You'll notice that the word sarx has a range of meaning, illustrated by its circle. The word flesh has its range of meaning, and they intersect some. But sarx has meanings that the word flesh doesn't have, and the word flesh has meanings that the word sarx doesn't have. So in other words, you don't have this range of meaning. Probably the most famous one these days, if you're connected at all with masters, is MacArthur's insistence that doulos is translated as slave. Well, no, it doesn't. To me, being raised in the South, slave has a very specific kind of connotation that the word doulos doesn't necessarily have. The closest word to doulos we have in English is a bondservant. And I've noticed that the revision of the ESV and sometimes in the NASB, they went that direction. But, you could also translate servant, a doulos very well as servant. But, a servant, I think of Downton Abbey and, cute little frilly aprons, and they can leave whenever they want in the middle of the night. Which a doulos can't do. Doulos is much closer to an indentured servant, either indentured voluntarily or indentured through war or something like that. But they don't mean the same thing. And so it gets really interesting. We start saying, and Paul says, well, you're a doulos of Christ. Well, I am a slave of Christ, but I'm not in servant. I mean, it's not quite the same thing, right? So languages have, words have a range of meaning and that you cannot replicate from one language to another. This is one of my favorites. This is a phrase that Paul uses, and he says in Romans 6, should we continue to sin that grace abound? And Paul says, it's just so fun to watch the translations deal with this. I think the NLT really blew this one, I think. It says, well, of course not, or something. No, it was really kind of a laid-back kind of, no. The King James is actually the best translation of this phrase. They say, God forbid. Now, the reason that's such a good translation is because it's the strongest way to negate something in English, isn't it? I don't know of a stronger way to say no in English. Now, the word God does not occur in me genoita. The word forbid does not occur in me genoita. But me genoita means God forbid. It means under no circumstances. Genoita is actually an old Greek mood called the optative that was used to state a wish. And so the phrase kind of got frozen in time, and it means don't even wish for that. I mean, this isn't even close to any kind of probability or possibility. It's not even, don't even wish. No, you absolutely cannot continue in sin that grace can abound. Well, we don't have, optative phrases in English. And so me genoita is a really good word. I always tell when I'm speaking to university students, I said, ladies, this is the phrase you use when you're on a date and you want the guy to stop. Me genoita. Don't even wish for that. Anyway, all right. It works better with a college-age student. All right. This is one that I actually blogged on about a week ago. And the Magi say, we saw his star, blank, and we came to find him. And the old translations, we saw the star in the east, right? And almost all the modern translations are saying, we saw the star when it arose. Now, this is the fascinating translation problem, because where do stars appear? Star in the east, right? I mean, as long as the earth keeps revolving the direction it's revolving, the stars will always appear in the east. But that's not what the word means, actually. The word means when it arose. I don't think the star was a natural star, because not only did it point out Bethlehem, it pointed out the room where Jesus was. And I'm not aware of any star having a laser coming out of it pointing at a room. So I think the star that the Magi saw was totally supernatural. And the point is, the Magi are sitting there wherever they came from, and all of a sudden they go, there's a new star up there. It's not that it was in the east. It was that, oh my goodness, there's a new star when it arose. We saw when it arose. We saw, there's a new star in the east. What on earth is that? Oh my goodness, look, it looks like it's pointing. Let's go figure out what it is. So because of my view on the star, I strongly argue for when it arose. But the point is, we don't have a way, unless you say you can do it and expand it. We saw the star when it rose in the east. But what translators don't like to do is to double translate. They don't like to give two different translations of the same word. That's why these things are all done on committees, and it's why you vote. And once you have a set translation, it generally requires a supermajority to change it. And they're going to look at that, and they're not going to double translate that. As far as I know, nobody does. They're going to have to make a decision. Is this about when the star rose, or is it in the east? So it's just an illustration that it's the kind of challenges that we have with vocabulary. One of the other illustrations in the book, it's a really hard one, is Isaiah 7:14. Isaiah is telling the king to ask for a sign. The king says, I'm not. And Isaiah says, no, you don't understand. God told you to ask for a sign. He said, I'm not going to. And Isaiah says, well, there's going to be a sign. And this is going to happen before the Greek word is parthenos. I forget what the Hebrew is. The word before so-and-so bears a child. Well, the problem is the word can mean a young woman of marriageable age, or it can mean virgin. When Matthew picks up the prophecy, you have to go with virgin, right? Because that's the whole point. But there's a really good chance that in Isaiah, I'm kind of getting off, well, this is what translation is. If you look just at the Isaiah passage, it's Isaiah's wife that he's probably talking about. And he's saying, before my wife gets pregnant and gives birth to a child, this sign is going to occur. Matthew, in his Jewish way of viewing things, sees that as a prophecy that a virgin will conceive and have a child. This is what got the RSV in so much trouble when they translated parthenos as young woman and not as virgin. And it was seen as a liberal translation. I think they were wrong. And you have to keep it virgin because that's how Matthew understood it, and Matthew was inspired. But you can see that these are the kinds of problems, and that's one of the hardest ones, that we have to deal with. So grammar is an interesting, I got to use this one just because I'm in Hawaii. Paul's shipwrecked on Malta. And the people there were very kind to him. And the Greek word refers to people who were indigenous to an area. And the problem is, the word occurs, I think it's 3 times in Acts 28. And if you use people indigenous to Malta 3 times, it's really bad English style. So you need to get a word, not a phrase, to translate it. Well, the NIV, at least I think the older NIV, has islanders. But when you hear the word islanders, what do you hear? Last time we were in Hawaii, went to a luau. Well, that's what I hear when I hear islanders, all right? NASB says natives. Well, when I hear the word natives, I'm thinking of someone in Africa, right? Because it is accurate that it's native, but we generally, at least I would think of a native as from missionary pictures and whatnot, as people in Africa. ESV says native people, native people, native people. Terrible English style. CSB says local people, local people, local people. Poor style. NET, local inhabitants, local inhabitants, local inhabitants. NLT says people of the island, people, whatever. The King James says barbarous people. Now, how would you like to be referred to as barbarous people in Hilo? Well, that's not what the word means. Maybe it meant that in 1611, but those are the kinds of things that we have to deal with. And what does the word mean? Well, the word clearly means people who are indigenous to Malta. How do you say the same thing in proper English style? Okay, this is why we have translation committees. But vocabulary is an interesting thing. Also, we have the same problems at the level of grammar. Because not only do we have different words, but we put words together differently. And a couple of, just a modern example, and these are in the book. I try to use illustrations that aren't in the book, but sometimes the best ones I know are in the book, so I'll use them. I was in Shanghai a couple of years ago. Well, more than that, wasn't it? 4 or 5 years ago, something like that, when you could still go to Shanghai. And I got on the do not admit list, so I don't know if I'll ever get back. But I was speaking to a group of people, and I was teaching on the Sermon on the Mount, and I talked about, you in this verse, you cannot straddle the fence. You just can't straddle the fence. That's what Jesus is saying. And I realized that I hadn't seen a single fence between houses. And I turned to my translator, who's a good friend of ours, and I said, how did you translate that? And she smiled. She said, a foot in two boat. Okay, there's not plurals in Mandarin, apart from personal pronouns, I guess. So it was foot. And then in two boat, there's no plural for boat, but because the word two is in front of it, TWO, it's clear that it's more than one boat, also because you have 2 feet. Well, that's the most literal, accurate way to translate the English idiom of straddle the fence into Chinese. The other example I use, and it works better with college students, but I tried to teach myself German for my doctoral thesis, and I was never sure I was getting anything right. So about 2 years through the PhD, I said, Mom and Dad, can I please go to Germany and be taught German? And they said, okay. So most of the Germans were there. Most of the English people in the schools at a Goethe Institute knew a lot more German than I did, and they made me speak German, which is what you want to do. And we were outside once, and it was starting to get cold, and I said, okay, I'm going to say something in German. Okay, I'm going to say, I am cold. Okay. If you know, every once in a while when I say this, I can see who knows German. Well, I is ich, or ish, if you're from the north. Bin is am, and cold is kalt. So I said, okay, to say I am cold, it'd be ich bin kalt. So I said, ich bin kalt. My friends, we were outside. They hit the ground. They were rolling in laughter. I mean, they were hysterical. I don't really like being laughed at, but it's just okay. And I said, wait a minute, no, ich bin kalt. No, that's how you say I am cold, right? And after, they had to take like 15 minutes or 15 seconds to stop laughing at me. And I said, what did I say? Do you know what I said? I said, I am sexually frigid. The same idiom, by the way, is in French, I'm told. One of my board members knows French, and he was in France when he was a younger man. He said that to a girl and got slapped, which would be the appropriate response if somebody said that to you and you didn't know them, right? So if you want to say, I am cold in German, you say something to the effect of, it is to me cold. Es ist zu mir kalt. Something like that. And there's shorter ways to say it. But our grammar is different. English and Chinese is different. English and German is different. Greek and Hebrew and English are different as well. So we have this other problem of we have to know the grammar well enough to know what it meant, so we can say how it means. So here's an example, and this is a fascinating example. This is 1 John 3:9, and in the CSB it says, everyone who has been born in God does not sin. Oh, cool. So if you're really a Christian, you don't sin. Anyone here a Christian? Because his seed, meaning the Holy Spirit, remains in him. He is not able to sin because he's been born of God. Now, if you're a Wesleyan perfectionist, you go, amen. And I was talking to a professor from Asbury once, Asbury Seminary in Kentucky, and he said, God has done a gracious act to gift him a gracious act in my life, and he's removed sin's effect on me, and I no longer sin. Really? That was fascinating, but that's Wesleyan perfectionism. So the CSB and I was shocked, that they just translate that way because it opens it up to all kinds of misunderstanding, like perfectionism. So this is the grammatical thing. So you come along, and the NASB, which again is very careful to not leave the words. And usually when they do, they italicize to let you know that they're adding a word in. It's like some of the King James editions are. NASB says, no one who has been born of God practices sin. Okay. No one who has been born of God lives in constant sin. No one who's born of God thinks it's okay to live in constant sin. His seed, God's seed, remains in him, and he cannot sin continually because he has been born of God. Now, they italicize the word continually. They did not italicize the word practices. It's exactly the same grammatical construction. It's a form of the verb that can accurately be translated, does not sin. It can just as accurately be translated, does not continue to sin. And I like to tell people, this is the single most interpretive verse in all of the ESV. In fact, when we got to translating this was my suggestion, and I was shocked it passed unanimously. Because again, the ESV does not want to add in words if it doesn't have to. ESV says, no one born of God makes a practice of sinning, for God's seed abides in him. And he cannot keep on sinning because he has been born of God. Now, is the NASB and the ESV adding words to God's holy word? No. We have a grammatical construction that is flexible in its meaning, and you have to decide what it meant so you can say what it means. And one of the things that I enjoy about translation, and as I've talked to people in other committees, is that translators are very aware of misunderstanding. They do not want to lead someone astray. It's incredibly important to every translator I know. And that's why I am going to write Schreiner about the CSB. And I say, come on, Tom's one of my best friends. I say, you've got to change this. You can't say that. And we'll see if the CSB listens. But anyway, when we talk about the complexities of moving from one language to another, we have the issue of vocabulary and we have the issue of grammar. So what's the solution? Well, the basic solution is to answer the question, are you going to err on the side of words, or are you going to err on the side of meaning? So a translator is going down the edge of a knife blade and trying to stick to the words, for the most part, and then in every single verse in the Bible, they'll hit a word and they say, oh, that's not English. I can't say that. And at that point, you have to decide whether you're going to err on the side of, well, I'm just going to convey the words in the translation and leave it up to you to figure it out. Or am I going to move over to the side of meaning and help you know what it means? This is the difference between the ESV and the NIV. The ESV, we kept Webster's open a lot. And we would want to stick closer to the words, and if we weren't sure, we would look up the word in a dictionary and say, is that the right definition of the biblical term? Or if somebody really worked at it, could they still understand what these words mean? And if basically the committee thought that, yeah, most people could, then we just went with words. The NIV would never do that. The NIV would always say, what does it mean? And how do I convey the same meaning? I don't want to make it hard for you. I want to help you understand what the clear meaning of the text is. So that's the division. Generally, we talk about two different kinds of translation philosophies. We talk about formal equivalent, ESV, err on the side of words, or functional or dynamic equivalents, err on the side of meaning. And I really argue that that's a very simplistic way to look at it. And there's at least 5 different categories of translation philosophy. The first one is, we just call it an interlinear, right? You have the Greek word, and underneath it you have an approximate value of that Greek word in English. I've done 2 of these interlinears. I've done where the Greek's dominant and I put the English under it. Another one, the English is dominant and I put the Greek underneath it. And so my dad and I actually did one of the translations. The other one is the NIV. But that's the closest thing that you have to a word for word kind of translation, and I should just a minute. Let me pull up John 3:16 because it's kind of a fun illustration. Here's John 3:16 word for word, and this is how an interlinear would tend to do it. In this way, for he loved the world, so that the Son, the only he gave, in order that each, the believing into him, not perish, but have life eternal. Okay, that's word for word, what John 3:16 says. Is that English? I like your response. No, that's not English. That's not English. It is English words, and if you really work at it hard, you can figure out kind of what it means, but there's a lot of things you would not get. For example, the believing is a very indefinite construction, and it means every single person who believes will not perish. And there are some of my very reformed friends that don't like that. They want to limit this to the elect. And I go, there is no elect in John 3:16. It's wide open, indefinite, each person who believes. And it leaves it up to your theology to determine who can believe. But that's what an interlinear looks at. You're going to kick me off? Okay, all right. He'll just correct me next week. Okay. But interlinears are still very, very interpretive. They have to be, because otherwise they just don't make sense. I'm going to show you an example in a little bit. The next category is what is generally called a formal equivalence. This is the NASB, the ESV, and probably if you leave out the gender language, which we're getting to, the NRSV fits in this category. The problem with the CSB, the revision of the Holman Christian Center Bible, and the King James is that sometimes they're very word for word, and sometimes they're not even close to word for word. So it's really hard to know what camp to put them in. But most people would also put the CSB and the King James into this category. And they will say, we're going to err on the side of words. It's not as good in English. The English is not as stylistic. It's not as proper. But we're going to stick to the words as possible. Here's the problem with these translations. Every single verse diverges from the Greek. Every single verse. There's not a single verse in the ESV or the NRSV where they actually stuck to the Greek words. Because you can't do it. The Greek has a different order of words. It has a different kind of grammar. It has a different kind of vocabulary. Even a sentence as simple as Jesus wept. You would say, oh, that's certainly got to be exactly what the Greek says. No, because the Greek probably says Jesus burst into tears. It's not that just that. It's called an septiverus, if any of you are Greek nerds. It's not just that Jesus wept. He burst into tears over Lazarus. So the problem with these Bibles is that they give the appearance of sticking to the words, but they don't. And if you don't know Greek, you don't know when they're following the Greek and when they're not following the Greek. I have a bit of an issue with people. Well, I don't have a bit. I have a really big issue with people and marketers who say, you can see the Greek behind the English. No, you can't. Maybe this word here and that word there, but you don't know when you're looking at the Greek behind the English or when you're looking at an interpretive position taken by the translators. And that happens every single verse in the Bible. But there are real advantages to an ESV kind of translation. It's interpretive, but it's not as interpretive as others. The other category is generally called, it used to be called the dynamic equivalent, well, it used to be called functional equivalent, then they went to dynamic equivalent, and then other people have different terms. But this is the NIV. And in the NIV, we are willing to be a little more interpretive, to err off the knife blade into the arena of meaning. And the problem, of course, is that it is a little more interpretive. And you'll find phrases in the NIV, and you're comparing it to the ESV, and you go, oh, boy, that's really different. Well, it's probably a position where the NIV felt it needed to be a little more interpretive, a little more on the side of meaning to really convey the meaning accurately. But properly, it is focused on meaning. The NIV really doesn't care whether it's a participle or not. It's not important. It's what does the participle What is the meaning conveyed by the Greek participle? How do I say the same thing in English? Now, probably, if we can say the same thing with an English participle, we will. But there's not a lot of pressure to do that because it's the meaning that's important. The other category is called a natural language category, and this is the NLT. The NLT is an amazing translation. It is beautiful English. And in fact, we just recorded a class on Daniel by Trimper Longman, who's the head of the committee of the NLT. So we had some fun time talking about stuff, biblical training recorded. And I said, let me make sure I'm presenting the NLT properly. Your goal is to make English ears hear exactly what the Greek ears heard. And he goes, that's exactly what we're trying to do. But in order to have you hear something exactly the way the Greek does, it has to add in words. It has to become even more, and I'm going to give you examples in a bit, even more interpretive. And I love reading the NLT, especially in the Old Testament. If I kind of get stuck, I don't know what a verse means, I'll flip over to the NLT and I'll see how they translate it. But I read the NLT as a kind of a running commentary as to what a group of very, very smart translators and English stylists think the verse means. I would never preach out of the NLT, but I use it a lot just to check my interpretation of a verse. There's another category, and there's no word for it. Probably people use the word paraphrase, but all translations are paraphrase. Every single, except maybe interlinears, every single one is a paraphrase. They're all thought for thought. None of them are word for word. That's the problem. But these are quote translations that really bring everything into modern culture. So this is, I didn't write it down. Help me. The Message fits in this category, and some of the other ones like that. J.B. Phillips, wonderful paraphrase, fits in this category as well. But these again are a running commentary on what it would sound like if John lived today in Hilo. All right? So you get phylacteries in the Greek, and you get tassels on the robe or something like that. I mean, when you read these books, you wouldn't know you're reading a 2,000-year-old book because it sounds like modern English. And the problem is you have to be so interpretive to do that, and you have to add in so many words that you don't know whether you're looking at a biblical word or a translator's word. Let me give you a couple of examples here. I just found this the other day. It's Matthew 5:41. The CSB says, this is Jesus speaking in the Sermon on the Mount, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. That's what the words say. That's what the words mean. And we understand that Jesus isn't really talking about going another mile, is it? It's that we are not to use our Christian freedom in a way that does not encourage us to help others. But if somebody wants something, we go above and beyond. That's the idea, right? Above and beyond. Well, kind of. The NLT understands, though, that there's an historical precedent behind this verse. Do you know what it is? A Roman soldier had the legal authority to make you carry his pack for 1 mile. Not 2, but 1. And that's what's behind Jesus saying. And he's thinking if anyone forces you to go 1 mile. He's thinking of soldiers, but he states it in such a way that it's more broadly applicable. The NLT comes along and says if a soldier demands you carry his gear for 1 mile, carry it 2 miles. Well, yeah, that is historically what Jesus is thinking of, but the problem with the NLT is that if you don't have a soldier telling you to carry his pack, the verse is non-applicable to your life, right? You wouldn't catch that at all. I had a really great talk with Tremper on that, and I said, I really think you need to change this because you're limiting the applicability of Scripture. But anyway, that's just an example of erring on one side on words, on the other side on meaning. Another good example is Acts 28:11, and this is a real tricky one. This is the boat that Paul took to get to Malta. This is the one where he left the island and went to Malta. And the NASB says It has the twin brothers, capital T, capital B, the twin brothers for its figurehead. Who on earth are the twin brothers? I mean, Robin has twin brothers, but I don't think it was Rick and Rust. You know, twin brothers, and it's capitalized, and that's the clue that it really means something, that if I were a first century person, I might know what that meant, but I don't know who the twin brothers are. The NIV says the figurehead of the twin gods, Castor and Pollux. Well, that's quite a bit extra, isn't it? But it does identify who the twins are. They're not twin brothers, they're twin gods. Except, of course, at one level, they are gods who are brothers in mythology. But it's the figurehead of the twin gods, Castor and Pollux. The NLT says, with the twin gods, lower t, lower g, as its figurehead, which is, by not capitalizing it, I think the NLT made a mistake. There needs to be an indication to the reader that most people should know who the twin brothers are. The problem is the Greek simply says diaskouros, which means twins. So they're twins. Well, twins what? Are they twin brothers? Are they twin gods? Who are these people? I don't know. I don't know that. You know, you see the problem? How do you say twins and have it mean something? So again, you have people dealing with that. My other favorite example, and this is in the book, Jesus says, are not two sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. That's the NRSV, NASB, ESV, and King James. Apart from your Father. Now, my normal line there is that's not English. It doesn't mean anything. The sparrow's not going to fall to the ground apart from your Father. Your Father what? That's not English, is it? Well, that's because there's no Greek word there. And other translations will look at the context and they'll come up with different definitions. The NIV says, apart from your Father's care, which is what's going on in this passage in the Sermon on the Mount. CSB says, apart from your Father's consent. Okay, so now is Jesus saying, you would like this, is Jesus saying that every sparrow who falls to the ground only falls when God determines that it will? Is that what Jesus is saying? The NAT, your Father's, apart from your Father's will. The NLT, apart from your Father knowing it. Okay, now we've gone from will to knowledge. Well, see, this is the problem we're fighting. If you just stick with words, it doesn't mean anything. But what is the context? How does the context help us understand it? Okay? So these are the kinds of challenges, the kind of issues that we deal with. I was looking at this as I go over my notes this morning. I said, I need to cover a couple things. Everything I've covered is in chapter 10, but there are a couple things in chapter 11 that I really need to flesh out for you all, and I have plenty of time. If you've been watching my blogs very long, you know that I do not like the word literal because we don't use it properly. And people have a really bad misunderstanding on what the word literal means. For most people, if you say, what kind of Bible do you want? They'll often say, well, I want a literal Bible. And what they mean by that is I want a Bible that is as word for word as possible because that makes it accurate. And that's the problem. It's an assumption that if you go word for word, you are accurately translating the meaning of the verse. Make sense? All right. There's only one literal Bible. It's called Greek and Hebrew. That's the only literal Bible there is. Okay, there is no such thing as a literal English Bible. Y'all, it does not exist. And you will hear this time and time again. And it fosters this idea that if it's literal, it's word for word, and therefore it's more accurate. And that simply isn't how language functions. It really isn't how language functions. And there is no such thing as a literal English Bible. And In the NRSV, Professor Metzger says that the NRSV's translation philosophy is essentially literal. And I used to call the idea of a literal Bible linguistic nonsense. But I can't say that about something Professor Metzger said. I have too much respect for the man. But the ESV really makes a point of this in its marketing, doesn't it? This is an essentially literal translation. No, it's not. It's not. And all you have to do is pick up an interlinear and compare it to the NASB or the ESV or the CSB or the NRSV, and you'll see that they simply don't line up. There is not a single verse in any of those translations that is word for word. Okay, have you ever heard anything like this before? Okay, it's all you have to do is get an interlinear, buy mine, and open up your favorite Bible and get 2 verses and look at them, and you'll go, oh my goodness, this is not word for word. They've changed the word order around. They have different translations for different Greek words. It doesn't exist. And again, this is my complaint when I was in a debate at Corbin University once, and one of the men up on the stage was the Greek teacher at the school. Corbin's a great school, by the way. It's in Salem, Oregon. It's a really, really good evangelical, discipleship-oriented school. If you have kids that want to go to a Christian school in the mainland, Corbin and Biola are 2 very, very good schools. But in the debate, he said, well, I think that I should be able to use the translation in my first year Greek class so that people can see the Greek behind the English. And I said, really? You think that's why you publishers spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to translate the Bible so your Greek students can have a crutch because they don't want to learn Greek? He said yes. And I went, wow, okay. That's not why we write Bibles, translate Bibles. We translate Bibles so we can convey the meaning of the living Word of God and save souls and encourage them in their perseverance until the Lord comes back again. That's why you do what we do. We don't build crutches for Greek students that haven't learned their vocabulary. The problem with saying, oh, I like this Bible because I can see the Greek behind the English. Well, if you can see the Greek behind the English, then you should be reading Greek. If you don't know Greek well enough to read it, then you don't know when the English is showing you the Greek and when it's showing you words the translators have used to convey the meaning of the Greek. See the distinction? So this is a real hobby horse of mine, and I just don't agree with the marketing. It's interesting when you go to the Oxford English Dictionary, which my British friends tell me is the only dictionary I have to go to. The main definition of, you can buy it for $10 as an app. If you buy in paper, it's a couple $100, I think. But it has an app, at least when I bought it, it was $10. And if you look up the word literal, what you'll find is that the basic meaning of the word literal has to do with form. Backwards. The basic meaning of literal has to do with meaning, not form. In other words, if you're reading something and you want a literal understanding of it, that means you don't want an allegorical interpretation or a spiritualized interpretation or something that the author didn't intend. But literal primarily, the word literal primarily has to do with meaning. And you can see why I'm building a case for the NIV. That is pretty obvious, isn't it? Okay, all right. ESV is a good translation. Just you need to understand where it fits on the spectrum and where these other books fit on the spectrum. So we talk about authorial intent. What meaning did the author intend to convey? That's what you want in your translation, isn't it? And so it doesn't really matter whether the author used a preposition or not. It's what did he mean, and then how do I convey that same meaning in English? And if I were to beat this dog even further, I'll just mention individual words don't have a literal meaning. How can you have a literal Bible if words don't have literal meanings? Okay, this is the bundle of sticks. This is the run. This is the key. Words don't have a literal meaning. They have a range of meaning, and perhaps one of the sticks in the bundle is larger than others. Maybe the largest bundle in the word sarx is flesh, but it's only one of many sticks in that bundle. So words don't have a literal meaning. They have a range of meanings, and grammar is simply too different. And so when you can't have literal grammar. And the example I use, and again, it's in the book, and did I write it out? No, I didn't. Okay. When I'm in the schools talking about this in a Greek class, I'll put two words on the board. Tu theou. So in English transliteration is T-O-U, which is the article, generally translated as the. And theou is the word for God, T-H-E-O-U, in this form. So I'll put tu theou up on the board. And I'll say, somebody translate that literally for me. And they know I'm leading them down a dark alley, and so they don't want to say anything. But after a while, some brave second-year Greek student says, that means of God. So, okay, tu theou means of God. That's your literal understanding of tu theou. Yep, is that okay? Well, of is a preposition. Where's the preposition in tu theou? Well, there isn't a preposition. Well, it's the genitive case, it's called. Both words are in what's called a genitive case. Oh, so what you're telling me is that while there is no preposition, it means of. Now, how's that literal? And then I'll say, and you translated tu theou as of God, but you didn't say of the God. Why did you drop out the article? You left out half of the phrase I showed you. Do you leave words out of God's holy word? And oh, by the way, did you capitalize G or not? Now, the phrase tu theou occurs, I think, like 500 times in the Bible. And 500 times, we have to interpret what it means. Okay, that's what I'm getting at here. Translation is about meaning. It's not about form. Make sense? See, it's a hobby horse, and it's kind of a techie, but the ESV is a really, really good translation, you all. Okay, it took 10 years. It's an evangelical-friendly update of the RSV. In the contract that Crossway got to get the RSV from the original copyright holders, they actually specified in the contract that Isaiah 7:14 would be translated as virgin. They said the punctuation in Romans 9:5 would call Jesus God. I mean, it actually went through all these things and said, you need to know this is what we're going to do to the old RSV. And the copyright holders were very low on cash, and I think that's why they probably agreed to it. And so it took 10 years of 12 evangelicals, J.I. Packer was the chairman, of going through the RSV and making it evangelical friendly and making it, we thought, better. So the ESV is a really, really good translation, but you need to understand it's going to err on the side of words. And that's fine as long as you know that's what it's doing. All right? It's getting the meaning across is not as critical if it thinks that the words, even though they're awkward English, not as awkward as the NASB, but an awkward English conveys the meaning. That's a great translation. The NIV is just a different kind of translation. NASB is even a different kind of translation. Okay? So what happens in translation committees is that you have translation philosophies. And we kind of figured out the ESV as we went. I think the publisher always knew what he wanted. The NIV's translation philosophy was done 40 years ago. But in the translation philosophy, the group, the translators, will have decided what side of the knife blade are we going to fall off on. How far are we willing to go with translating just the words, even if it's awkward English, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You have to work harder to understand it. Or are we going to err more on the side of meaning, be a little more interpretive, but try to faithfully convey the meaning of the original? That's what's in the translation philosophy for all of these Bibles. And people ask, well, how could you have served on the ESV and the NIV? I said, it's easy. They both have translation philosophies. And my job as a translator is to be consistent. It's not to change the translation philosophy. I was never going to try to turn the NIV into the ESV. And every once in a while, I'll come up with a pretty NLT-ish kind of suggestion for a translation. And I normally get a good chuckle from the committee. Say, oh, look how far Billy Mounce has gone. You know, but this is our job as translators is to be consistent. So that's what we really try to do. And I have yet to find a random translation in any Bible. There's always a reason. But you have to know what the philosophy is to really understand it. We can come back to this if you want. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is, because I know it's not as hot a topic as it used to be, but it's still one of those really big topics, is the whole issue of gender language. This whole discussion was started in the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, and they went away from words like man and brother and he. And then there was a revision to the NIV that came out that I was not on the committee when it happened, and they went just as far with this gender language issue. And in fact, the kickback against it was so strong that they called it today's new NIV. And I actually was one of the 40 people that signed a protest against the TNIV. I just didn't think it was a good translation. What happened was Zondervan got a new president named Mo Gherkins, and Mo said, we can't support two translations. We can't support an NIV and a TNIV. So she told the committee in their 2010 meeting, because we meet every year, and this is my first year on the committee, said, get it right. Come October 1st, I'm killing the old NIV, I'm killing the TNIV, and whatever you have is the new NIV. Said, because we can't market three different versions of the same Bible. That's how we got the 2011. If you're wanting the history behind the current NIV, the 2011, that's what happened. And it makes perfectly good sense. No publisher. When the ESV did changes, you can't buy the old ESV. When the CSB came out, you can't buy the Holman Christian anymore. This is just, publishers can't. I mean, these Bibles are so phenomenally expensive, and sales are dropping off significantly. Because said a lot of people will buy one nice print Bible and they get 20 versions on YouVersion. And that's what's happening in the Bible market. And no publisher, even as big as HarperCollins, can't support three different versions of the same Bible. So what the NIV did, everyone else has done. Okay? So I just want to make that clear. Having said that, let's talk about the gender language. And the attack has been mostly on the NIV. Partly because it's the big dog, and people like to kick the big dog. But almost every charge that we've heard about the NIV also applies to the NLT, often to the CSB as well, to the Net Bible. But the NIV has the largest market share, so you hear people complaining about the NIV. But let me tell you a story before I get into it. We homeschooled our kids. We're pretty conservative. Robin especially is pretty conservative. There's never been a feminist idea expressed in our house when the kids were little. Limited television, okay, all these kind of homeschool kind of things, Of course, Tyler was valedictorian and Kirsten's getting her PhD in art history right now. But anyway, my kids received a really good education from their mom at home. And the point I'm saying is that it's very little outside influence. Well, I walked into Kirsten's bedroom one day, and there was a bulletin board there, and she had Xeroxed a part of a Bible, a page out of it, and had crossed out the word he and wrote in she and pinned it to her bulletin board. Oh no, what's going on? Robin! She comes in and said, how old was Kirsten when this happened? Yeah, 8. Yeah, really young. And I said, Robin? And she goes, I've never seen that before in my life. I said, okay, Kirsten. Kirsten comes up. Yes, Daddy. I go, I see you're putting up a Bible verse. Yeah. I said, is that to memorize it? I put it up there so I can memorize it. I said, honey, that's really, really good. So we wanted to validate that. And then we said, I noticed that you crossed out the word he and wrote in she. Completely innocent. And I said, you mind to tell me why? He says, well, the Bible's for me too, and not just Tyler, isn't it? Tyler's her big brother. So you can talk all you want about feminism or modern culture and the effect it has on language, and it certainly has. But here's an innocent little 8-year-old who's never even heard the word feminism that's crossing out the word he and putting in she because she doesn't think that he refers to her. Okay, that is one of the main reasons I got in the NIV. Because I wanted to be part of the process of making a Bible for my daughter. Okay? So, that's what kind of lies behind it. I can get emotional, just ignore it. So, point one, gender neutral. Hayden is going to Multnomah University. It's a Christian university in Portland. And he says, Dad, how come the NIV is gender neutral? I said, why do you think the NIV is gender neutral? I said, well, my teacher is up there reading the ESV, and it's he, and I'm reading the NIV, and it says they. I said, he goes, it's gender neutral. You're removing gender from the Bible. And, I mean, he really thought we were. And I said, Hayden, what does gender neutral mean? Gender neutral technically means there's no gender, all right? And I said, is God a he or a she? Is he revealed as a he or a she? Well, he. So there is gender. Are there fathers? Yeah. So you kind of go down the list and say, there is gender in the NIV. There is gender in the CSB. Okay? There's gender even in the NLT. And in places in the NRSV. Gender neutral means there's no gender. There's zero. And no Bible is gender neutral. So if you're used to using that word, please stop, because there is no gender neutral Bible. The second category is gender inclusive. Now, this is a slight difference. Gender inclusive says the translators are looking at everything that the Bible says a man can do and is including women. So, for example, this is in the NRSV, is the only one that gets close to gender inclusive, where instead of saying man, they'll say parent. And instead of saying son, they'll say child, like in the wisdom, like in Proverbs 3 kind of stuff. Gender inclusive it keeps gender, but whatever is true for a man is also true for a woman, and they will translate it that way. Okay, that's gender inclusive, and the only translation I'm aware of that does that is the NRSV. The NLT does it in places, but they're really good, and you don't even know it's doing it. But in the NRSV, it's very clear that that's what they're doing. Man, or forefather becomes ancestor. Okay, well, certainly in that culture, the whole issue was forefather, not foremother. But in the NRSV, it's going to say ancestor. The third category is what everyone else is trying to be, and that is gender accurate. Every translation out there is trying to represent the gender of the words accurately. But here we run into a massive cultural issue. Massive. If you're from the southern part of the United States and you say he, especially if you're in a rural area, most women hear he as he and she. In other words, this is an issue for ladies in the South nearly as much. It would be in the cities, but certainly not in the rural areas, because the language hasn't evolved that much in the southern area. If you say that in the North, very few women will hear the word he and transpose it to he, she. Now, they may know that's what the text is saying, but they don't like it. So, do you want to unnecessarily offend your readership, especially since more women than men read the Bible? At least according to Sales, that's the case. I meant to say, back up on representative male, where it really gets difficult is when it's a king passage in the Old Testament, where the king is a precursor of the Messiah. It's a messianic passage, like in Psalm 2 and Psalm 110. It really, really gets complicated. But anyway, I got ahead of myself, I'm sorry. So we're all trying to be gender accurate, but culturally things change. For example, there's 15 of us on the NIV, women and men. And if I said, ladies, no, I didn't say that. I said, you all, that's the really safe way to go. I said, y'all, I don't know how to refer to this group. What word do you want me to use? I don't want to offend you. This is not a theological issue for me. How do you want me to refer to them? They said, oh, guys is fine. Guys? Yeah, it's generic. And then she said, but don't call us gals. If you want to really tick my wife off, call her a gal. She does not like that word. But the ladies on the translation team were perfectly comfortable with guys because for them it's a generic term. That's what I'm saying. This is a cultural thing, and it really varies from place to place. But everyone's trying to be accurate, but the problem is all our cultures are so varied, it's hard to do it. So here's 4 situations that this is what, and by the way, this is the hardest thing in translation today. There is nothing harder than this issue. And the NIV has made their decisions, CSB has made their decisions, all these kind of stuff. And so now we just have to be consistent. But finding the right wording is really, really hard. What do you do with an indefinite referent? Blessed is the one who walks not on the counsel of the ungodly, or sits in the seat of sinners, or walks in the way, I'm not getting this right, but blank delight is in the law of the Lord. And in that, blank meditates day and night. Blessed is the one, it's an indefinite phrase. It's everybody. It's any individual, okay? Blessed is the one who walks not on the counsel of the ungodly, for, how do you refer to that person? Yes, if you're comfortable with slightly older English, you say he. And that really makes translation work easy. That's the NASB, the ESV, and the CSB go with he. I was talking to Don Carson once, and if you know him, he's a very, very famous biblical scholar. And what Don likes to do is to go to secular campuses and argue with atheists and agnostics and whatever. He's really smart. And hopefully, I know you're trying to get him to come here. His comment was, if I read the ESV and it said he, everyone is going to shut me off. Because as soon as they hear what they consider an insensitive pronoun, and this is not gender sexuality issues at all. That's not what I'm talking about. But the minute they hear the he's already lost the debate. It's interesting. Then that's the decision. What happened on the NIV, and it's all up on the NIV Bible site. Somebody owns NIV.com, and they want like $1 million for it. And so the NIV site, I think, is thenivbible.com. It's something like that. But anyway, it's all this information is posted on the site. Zonovan actually spent $250,000. They hired the Collins Dictionary folks in England. And their number one question was, how do we refer back to an indefinite referent? Where is English? Because we are the new international version. So we're not interested just in the South or just in the northern part of the United States. We want to know worldwide, how is English changing? And language always changes, right? All language is always in a state of flux. So what's going now? The study that came back, and you can read all the details, it's fascinating. In the when you have all the male-oriented languages, man and he, you're going along and you get to the middle of the 1990s, like 1995, and the usage of those terms just plummets. In other words, everyone stopped saying he or man. The next year, it popped up higher in usage than it was before, because people realized there is no way to communicate these pronouns if I don't say he or man. And it popped up, and it's been slowly drifting off, which of course a lot of people hate, because they want to be able, because their English, their grammar is he, right? What the study showed was that the use of they as an indefinite number was on the ascendancy. That it is saying they can be both male and female. It can be both singular and plural. And yeah, okay, I know that's how most of us respond, because no, they's plural. But in terms of how the language is being used, this $250,000 study showed that they is being used. Blessed is the one who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, for they. And what's interesting is when I listen to my ESV buddies read papers, they say they. They would never say they in their translation, but when they want to refer to single entities, they'll say they all the time. And like it or not, that's where language is going. The problem is spoken language is always ahead of written language. And so I'll absolutely guarantee you that you've heard they, and you've processed it as singular. Because the newscasters speak this way, it's the way the language is. The problem is that written language is behind spoken language. So the one who has ears to hear, let them hear. And I went back and said, guys, that's a grammatical error. Because them is referring to ears if we say them and not let him hear. I lost the vote. But it happened more than once. But it's written language is behind spoken language. So what sounds natural still reads as odd. And once you've committed to they, you're also committed to them, which you're also committed to themselves. Because there is no singular reflective. Themself is finally in the dictionaries. They started appearing about 2 years ago. So all that to say, how you refer back to an indefinite referent is really hard. But the NIV, we talked for a whole morning on it. We had all been reading the study from Collins Dictionary folk, and we said, okay, this is the direction language is going. This has nothing to do with individuals choosing their own pronouns, which is kind of the thing today, right? What is it in Canada? If you refer to someone with a long pronoun, you're arrested and put in jail. It's a law in Canada now. Canadian told me that. And that's not at all what's going on. People like to say, well, the shift to they is because of the feminist influence. Well, maybe it was, I don't know, but that's not the point. The point is that's where language is going. And Rachel, you and I are going to always wince at it, except when we speak, because it just sounds so odd. But it is the way language is going. Okay, so how do you refer back to indefinite referent? What about a representative male? And I'm thinking here primarily of the inheritance language, where the son, the firstborn son, got a much higher inheritance than the secondborn sons or the daughters. I'm thinking of proverbial language where a father teaches a son. And I was really thankful in the NIV we kept son there because it's a proverbial form, and we just asked ladies to process the Proverbs 3 kinds of passages. But again, as I said earlier, and I said it out of line, is that there are passages where it's male language referring to the king, which is also referring to messianic. They become messianic prophecies, and that gets a little tricky. But what do you do about representative male? Thirdly, what about the word brother and man? All right, this is where it gets really interesting. The Greek word for brother is adophos. And I should not have done this, but it was because it wasn't overly respectful. But in the ESV committee, we got in an argument about brother, or adophos. And the person pursuing wanted to say brother. I wanted to say brother and sister. And he said brother. And when he finished, he said, and the text says brother. Okay? He's a very, very well-known scholar, someone that you treat with respect. And so I marshaled the evidence for the argument for saying brother and sister. And I said, and the text says adophos. I probably shouldn't have done it, but I still lost the vote. But the text doesn't say brother, the text says adophos. And so the question is cultural. How do you refer to a member of your faith community in the plural? I'm guessing you would say brothers, right? Well, in certain cultures, brothers still would be understood by ladies as all of you. Right up until you get to the point where it says, if your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault. Or if you know that your brother has anything against you, go and meet with him. Kirsten goes, oh, I don't have to do that. Because it says brother. It doesn't say brother and sister. It doesn't say sister. There is a form of the word for sister. It says adophos. How do you refer to a member of the faith community? It was fascinating to me to watch the CSB use he, but say brother and sister. The new NASB says brother and sister and puts and sister in italics, which I was just, wow, that's really an interesting shift for the NASB. But see what they're doing? They're trying to struggle. The word to some people does mean brother. But many people around the world hear the word brother and they think only male. And they may be able to figure it out, but they may not be able to figure it out. When I was pastoring, one of the really big, actually the big outreach event was VBS. And I wanted a bunch of Bibles to give away. I couldn't give them an ESV. First of all, it's written for 12th graders. And so, but we lived in a neighborhood that was highly unchurched, and I didn't want a 7-year-old kid to take a Bible home and have his sister look at it and say, he, and throw it out. Because that's what happens. So I had to get a different kind of Bible that was a little more gentle on gender language. Where this is really interesting is James. The word autophos occurs like 13 times, something like that. And we translated it brother and sister in every case. It's the right translation because he's talking to members of his faith community until you get to 3:1. And in 3:1, James writes, let not many of you out of foi become teachers. The minute we translate that brothers and sisters, the debate over women teaching's gone away. Right? Let not many of you, brothers and sisters, become teachers. Now, whether you think women can be teachers or not is not the issue. We did not want to make a decision for everyone, for the millions of people reading the NIV. So that's the one place in James where we didn't translate autophoi in the plural as brothers and sisters. We picked some other word. I don't know what it was. But these are the kinds of things we deal with. The other word is the word for man, anthropos. And man can mean male. There is another word that also means male, aner, but anthropos can mean male. It can also mean mankind in general. Or, depending upon your register, humanity, humankind, which I just hate as a word. It's not a word. I just don't like humankind. Well, I like humankind. I don't like the word humankind. I better be careful about that. And so, I argued as hard as I could against everyone who wanted to say humankind, and I don't believe the word humankind exists in the NIV. Something may have slipped by I didn't see, but it's a made-up word, and I don't like it. But fortunately, a lot of ladies still hear mankind as generic. And so we ended up going with mankind. But other translations are going to not like the word man and mankind, and they're going to human beings. So when you have a verse that contrasts God and a human being, what's that contrast? It used to be God and man. Is it God and human beings, God and humankind? And you want to be consistent in that. So you talk about it, you argue about it, and you vote on it, and you move on. That's how it works in translations. But those are the things that make, especially he is what makes translation so phenomenally difficult. And, in 20 years, I think the discussion will be completely gone. And any translation that says he will have changed, because this is just the direction language is going, and it's going very, very fast. So anyway, all right, let me get back to chapter 10, because I think I had, Let me end with conclusions and a couple of questions. What about translations? You need to recognize the limitations of translations. You either tend to over-translate or under-translate. Under-translation means you don't quite get all the meaning of the Greek into the English. Over-translate means you're just spending too much time trying to get all the meaning of the Greek into English. And it's really hard to hit the nail on the head in translation. But understand, that's just the limitation of languages. But 2, you can trust your Bibles. It doesn't matter which one it is. It doesn't matter if it's an interlinear, an NASB, all the way up to the NIV, even to the NLT. I have found very few places in the NLT where I think they got it wrong. But you can trust these translations. This isn't like the Quran,
where Muslims say if you don't read in Arabic, you're not really reading it. And that's just a view of language translation that's simply not accurate. I may not be able to get the meaning of a word 100% right, but the committee can get it about 98% right. And so you can trust your Bibles. There was a period of time when I was on the ESV and I was pastoring, and for 3 Sundays in a row, for whatever reason, I corrected the NIV. And a good friend of ours came up at the end of the third week, clutching her giant NIV study Bible, tears running down her eyes, and saying, "Do you mean I can't trust my Bible?" And I've never corrected a translation since, because all the translations are good, and you can trust them. As Bruce Walke says, every translation will lead you, all leaving out something like the Passion, which isn't really a translation. All translations will lead you to the cross. None will lead you to heresy. You need to understand that these different translations are different because they have different translation philosophies, different audiences and stuff like that. But they are very, very good, if you can understand them. The other one is and most people say this, is read 2. Pick one as your main translation. Pick one so you can scribble in it and you know that verse is in the upper right-hand corner somewhere near the end of the book. You know, that's how our minds work, right? Pick one as a major one and stick to it. But pick up a second and not the same kind. So, I mean, a great combination is you read the NIV and your secondary reading is the ESV or reverse. Or an NASB and maybe an NLT. But pick them in different categories, because I love reading multiple translations. I'm almost done working through the CSB right now. And every once in a while I come across the translation, I go, "Oh, that's interesting." And I go check the Greek and I go, "My goodness, they got it absolutely right." And other translations didn't. I really enjoy comparing translations. But I really encourage you to pick 2. Study from one, and this church would say ESV. But pick another one, NIV or NLT, and use it as your secondary reading. I kind of fill in the blanks, so to speak. I'd really encourage you to do that. So, someone says, "My Bible is a non-interpretive Bible." What do you say? It's not possible. Both steps, the meant and the means, require interpretation. Number 2, does literal mean word for word, means accurate? No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Literal has to do with meaning, not with form. That's the important part. Why are translations so different? Isn't it frustrating when if you're not reading the same Bible your pastor is preaching from, and it's different than what you're reading? Go, "Oh, come on, can't you guys get it together?" When I was pastoring, we primarily used the ESV, but I knew other people had all the other translations, and so I always read the other translations to see if anyone was going to hiccup when I read the ESV. And they're different because there's different translation philosophies. They're different because that's the nature of languages. And you have to deal with vocabulary, and you have to deal with grammar, and you have to deal with culture. Well, how do people go about doing translations? How do they make translations? Well, they're all done by committee. That's very important. The fact that J.B. Phillips did a reliable paraphrase is a work of God. I don't know if you've ever seen his New Testament in Psalms. He translated it so during the Battle of Britain that the workers in the foxholes, as he says, could read and understand the Bible. And it's remarkable what a good job that he did. But all the other major translations are all done by committees. And they're governed by their philosophy. They've made a decision on what side of the knife blade they're going to err on, and then they consistently do that. And finally, why is the NIV gender neutral? It's not. It's gender accurate. Just like the NASB is gender accurate. They just come at it a different way. All right, let me just conclude. And actually, this is more for the whole thing. Oh, I'm out of time. I talked too long this time, didn't I? I'm making up. I realized that in talking about this, and there's a story about it in the book, but I never really shared with people why I think the Bible's trustworthy. Okay, so we're out of translations now. We're into the whole issue. These are my answers. Number one, it says it is. Now, do I believe everything I read? Absolutely not. But if the Bible never claimed to be from God, I don't know if I would believe that it was from God. For me, it had to say it. Otherwise, it'd be just kind of weird. You know, Charles Dickens, oh, this is from God. Well, it never says it's from God, but I think this is from God. I mean, you just wouldn't do that. So I think it's really important that the Bible says it's from God. Thus saith the Lord in the prophetic voice, 2 Timothy 3:16 and those others. The negative argument is that I just don't think the arguments to the contrary are convincing, and that's what we've been talking about. Whether it's issues of the historical Jesus or contradictions or canon or text criticism or the nature of translations, I just don't think they've proved their point. And that's why I wrote the book. If I really thought that the Greek manuscripts were hopelessly corrupt, I would never say the Bible is trustworthy. I just don't think they've proven their point. And so the negative effects arguments don't. But positively, and I've not talked much about this, in Craig Blomberg's book on contradictions, he spends a lot of time dealing with this. There's all kinds of positive arguments that the Bible is trustworthy. There's no serious question that Jesus existed. There's just none at all. You'd have to be just so skeptical to be impossible. I think that in oral culture, oral tradition is trustworthy. I think they can remember the stories of Jesus. I think the gospel authors, I think we know who wrote them, and they were in a place to know the truth. I think the church as a whole understood which books came from God, which books the God Spirit spoke through. While there's variations in the manuscripts, I think they really did a good job. And that 0.04% is just more of an historical curiosity than anything else. Translations are imperfect, but they're good. They will all lead you to the cross. So, and if you state all those things positively, that makes a pretty strong case for a very unusual book that was written over 15, depending upon your dating of the Exodus, 1,800 years. It's really a library of books written by lots of different people at lots of different times, and there's all kinds of issues related to how we got it, but we got it, and it all fits together. The Old Testament all points to Christ, so forth and so on. There's all kinds of positive arguments for why I trust the Bible, but I also think that in terms of philosophy, accepting the Bible as true is the most rational choice. And people don't like the word rational there. They go, oh, this is an issue of faith. Well, yeah, but I don't have to put my brain on a shelf to believe the Bible's trustworthy. And I just think philosophically, the way the Bible explains reality is better than any other explanation. How do you explain beauty? If we were nothing but a series of amino acids that washed up on the shore in Hilo and slowly evolved into plants and then slugs and so forth and so on, you can't explain the concept of conscience. You can't explain the concept of beauty. Well, we have an understanding of beauty because we were created by a beautiful God, and his beauty is reflected in creation, and so we were built to see that beauty. Confucianism can't explain beauty. I believe the Bible because it says there is design. I don't know. You may look at a Picasso and think it's a mistake, but you look at a Rembrandt, you know that someone designed it, right? And I think the argument from design, which is what the Bible says, God created, he created it good, that's a very, very strong argument. I think the argument from irreducible complexity. Darwin said that the cell is not simple, then its entire system falls apart. Guess what? The cell is phenomenally complex. There's like 150 parts to it. And if you take out one little thing, it dies. In other words, you can't have a cell with 140 parts that later on develop 10 more parts, right? That's the argument from irreducible complexity. And I understand you can't prove a faith system. But I don't have to put my brain on a shelf. You don't have to put your brain on a shelf to come to a position of faith that the Bible best explains the reality that we see. And then I realized, ultimately, I meet Jesus in the Bible. I remember sitting when I was writing this book saying, okay, I need to really seriously question whether this is from God. I just started laughing. I said, why am I laughing? Because I meet Jesus there. and that is real to me. Now, that by itself doesn't make it true, but it is phenomenally powerful in my own heart to know that I'm meeting my Creator in the very words of the text. And frankly, I want to know what my Creator thinks. I want to know what's expected of me. I want to know what lies ahead. As my friend Ed said, who, by the way, left last night, his mother-in-law is a few days from death, and what he said to her is, Mom, when you die, you will instantly receive the consequences of your decision. Someone was telling her that after she dies, she makes a choice of heaven or hell. I go, what? And so he said, no, said, Mom, the instant you die, you will receive the consequences of the decisions that you have made. And I want to know that, and I want to know how to have the right consequences and not the wrong. That's why the Bible is so important to me, and it's why I've come to the conclusion that I can trust it. Again, just to remind, the book's there. You've seen it many times. Don't forget about biblical training. It's got 2,300 hours of world-class instruction, and it's all free. So almost anything you want to learn is on the site, and we keep adding stuff all the time. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here.